God be with you all.
All right, folks. So let's get into this video here. This is a clip from a video called "How the U.S. Made Slaves of All of Its People," but there's a particular segment in it where they get into the 13th Amendment. Now, I know some folks are going to tune out because it's going too far back, but you got to understand the foundation of something to really understand where it ended up. You have to really understand like the root of the problem in order to understand where the branches grew from. So as with any tree, you can chop at it a few times, but if you don't get to the roots, it'll just grow back, and in most cases will grow back even stronger. So I'm going to go through this clip with y'all. It's only about 2 minutes of this that I want to hit. We're going to take a moment to discuss, then we're going to come back to it, okay?
When you go to the 13th Amendment, one of the fascinating things about the text of that amendment is that it says that slavery is abolished, except in the case of a punishment for a crime.
So, here's what they did in the South. They criminalized being black. They reintroduced the black codes.
A whole category of new statutes passed in almost every southern state that attached these enormous penalties to what were in reality very minor. Those were laws that were only ever enforced against African Americans.
And these black codes were a way for the South to get a lot of labor. This is the system that ushered in convict leasing.
Convict leasing was a brutal system where the state made enormous profits by leasing out prisoners, but the real financial windfall went to the private corporations and the plantations that exploited the cheap labor. While the state collected fees, companies like Tennessee Coal, Iron and Railroad Company, U.S. Steel, Sloss Furnace, Pratt Coal and Coke Company, and untold numbers of plantations made exponentially more by using convicts to fuel their industries, pick their cotton, build their railroads, mine their coal, and produce their iron. This system turned human suffering into massive corporate profits. Workers were literally worked to death and quickly replaced with another convict.
In 1866, Congress gained control of the House and the Senate, and they will go on to pass a litany of civil rights bills. The 14th and 15th Amendment would be added, and they would release an instrumental piece of legislation that would change life in the South forever, something called the Reconstruction Acts. These acts released a military occupation of the South to ensure the rights of the newly freed and liberated black citizens. This marked the beginning of an era that would never be matched again. In 1865, 8% of black people were registered to vote. By 1867, 80% of black people were registered to vote, and they exercised their rights.
Blacks turned out in huge numbers at voting stations all over the South. But it wasn't just about politics. This was about revolution. Thousands of schools were built, HBCUs all over the South. For the first time ever, black children and adults walked into classrooms, eager to learn and eager to level up. It wasn't just about education either. With the skill set came jobs, and with jobs came financial freedom. We're talking about black families taking control of their own future. Shout out to Madam C.J. Walker, who would soon become America's first self-made female millionaire. Meanwhile, black men are diving deep into politics, shaping laws, building schools, and protecting black communities. This was a time when black families thrived. Faith, economics, education, and politics. 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina, was a multiracial hub of
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Sorry about that with the audio issue. But the black codes were basically instituted just so that they could utilize the same labor force that they had just freed from slavery. And so they put them in jail, and then that gave them legal rights to use those people however they want. What you may not know or understand is that that part has never changed. So the fact that an incarcerated person can be utilized by the state or federal government however they see fit, that has never changed, okay? So, like I said, we're going to get into Robert Brooks and that situation, but before we get to that, we have to start with how we view the inmate in the first place. So if you take it all the way back to the black codes, the inmate, as we would see it fast forwarded 150 years or so, is really just the freed slave that they put back in jail to use for slave labor. So if the perception of an inmate is just a freed slave who was put back into slavery for the purposes of labor, there is a human piece missing from that. That's literally like cattle. And just like cattle, one comes, one goes, blah, blah, blah. It's a revolving door. It starts to have a similar, kind of a similar look to it. So, you gotta definitely, you gotta take it to another level here, okay? So I'm gonna fast forward a little bit because I want you to understand that the basis for the discussion today is the perception of the inmate and what needs to change there. The perception of the person that has the criminal history, depending on what that history is. Now, some crimes, you know, we draw lines in certain places, but the stigma that comes along with some of these things plays out in the way that people are treated when they are behind bars. And what we saw in the Robert Brooks video that'll be coming up in a little bit is exactly how much they feel people are garbage once they end up behind the walls of a jail cell. So, now Robert Kennedy had something to say about the 1986 crime bill. So that's 100 years after the 1865 and Reconstruction and all that stuff was happening. And by the time the 80s came around, we all know what happened in the 80s, crack and all that kind of stuff, right? So with amazing timing, let's increase penalties for, you know, misdemeanors, so to speak, during the era when we're flooding the inner cities with this particular substance that people are going to be arrested for and have to do time for, and then we can use them for labor to build things. It's a really simple equation. It's dirty. I'll give it that. It's pretty dirty, but it's a very simple equation there. So we're going to listen to RFK say his little piece about it. And like I said, we're bringing you to current day. But I had to start with the black codes so you can understand where the perception of the inmate comes from. The inmate is a freed slave who is currently incarcerated for doing whatever and is still at the same dispense of the overseer, which is the officer in the in that situation. So I'm trying to control wording very well here because I don't want this to get taken down for me saying something about officers specifically. But there is a system here that's based on perception. And perception is 9/10 of the law, as they say, right? So if somebody feels like they're in danger, they perceived it, therefore 90% of the time it's considered real. So let's go here and listen to RFK here. And thank everybody for stopping in. I appreciate y'all for stopping in. Happy New Year, by the way.
The 1986 Criminal Justice Act, written by President Biden, was probably the worst blight on the African-American community. A kid who was in a black community that got caught with some crack got 100 times the penalty of a kid in a white community a mile away that had powder cocaine. By 1998, the black population in America's prisons had doubled. And they were for mainly nonviolent crimes. It was for drug crimes. And we destroyed an entire generation of black Americans. We made it in many states so they can't vote, they're disenfranchised. There was a generation of black children who were raised without their fathers. But prisons are now the biggest industry in rural areas in our country. And I want to develop instead a string of farm drug rehabs, healing farms in those same rural communities where people can go if they get involved with drugs, if they're debilitated by depression or dependence on psychiatric drugs, and where they can receive job training, get social skills, and make sure they can get GEDs and education. When I'm president, I'm going to make sure that federal prisoners have access to 12-step programs. If somebody wants to recover, that's a perfect place to do it. I'm going to provide educational opportunities and make sure that we do everything that we can to identify
that music is so sad in the
around
background.
country that are working. And then try to adopt those protocols in other prisons. If you like this video and you want to learn more about me and the movement that we're building.
So shouts to RFK for that. So basically, he's highlighting a problem that we all already know about. Everybody knows what happened in the 80s with crack. Everybody knows about the crime bill. And for those that didn't go far enough back, we now understand the black codes and the perception of the inmate to simply be a freed slave who was put back into incarceration for the purposes of general labor at the dispense of the state and or federal government. So as long as we're all together on that. We're all together on that. So thank you anybody who went through the history lesson with me. So we already know what the problem was, right? We created a problem and that problem never changed and it just took a different form. And then the black community accepted it and that's what made it real. So when we accepted the perception of the inmate, the uncivilized savage, as they would say, we accepted that perception and then exhibited the stereotype in culture, right? Then it made it easy for them to look at us as savage animals, the same as they did in 1865. So nothing changed. Only during that little period of Reconstruction did it seem like things were going okay for a second. And then that was all destroyed between just general Jim Crow and racism and things like that. And then we ended up with crack, which, you know, I'm not gonna talk too much about that situation because we know the CIA was involved and there's a lot. People don't really understand how deep that went, but even RFK, who was actually around for that time period and it's probably still connected to politics at the time, admitted, hey, we did that on purpose. They did that on purpose with the expectation that it would do exactly what it did. And then once it was done, once the act was completed, then they decide, where Trump will come back, and this wasn't too long ago, this whole First Step Act thing, and this was in the federal system where they did the First Step Act. So I don't want to call it too little too late, but this is in 2023 when they did this kind of stuff. So we go from 1860 something all the way through the 1980s, all the way into the early 2000s, all the way into what we would call our current day, our 2020s, right? And in that, they finally decided to address some of the punitive excesses of the 1980s and 1990s, right? But anybody that was caught up in the 80s and 90s has already had their life destroyed. If they're, not in jail or prison anymore. People did those sentences and finished them up by the time they came around to understanding that there was a problem, or not understanding that there was a problem, but trying to do something about the problem, right? So 2023 comes around and Trump apparently had put in this whole First Step Act thing. That's right. Hit the likes too. Hit the likes if you're in here. Like I said, I'm taking you through the information because we have to have a real conversation about the perception that started oh so long ago and makes it extra hard for us to understand what's really going on behind the walls of a jail. If you have a perception of a person as a savage animal or an animal in general, what do you do with that? You put it behind a cage and you lock it up and you control it. And when you do that, you exhibit whatever authority you feel like you need to for whatever situation comes up. So even if you're not 100% in the right, just the fact that that person is just a thing. It's just cattle. So what are people mad about if I hurt the cattle, right? And that's what the expectation is, and that's why a lot of those COs get in trouble, because when they're dealing with people, they're not dealing with people. They're dealing with inmates who are just freed slaves, savages that had to go back to jail to be used at the purposes and leisure of the federal and state governments, depending on what facilities they're in. That's as simple as it can get. How can you view a human if you've been told to view cattle when you see this description? This is cattle over here. That's why inmates have numbers. And it's not just social security number, it's just a number to identify your place in the cattle. And if you're fortunate enough, you'll get out of that situation and not come back. But we all know the rate of recidivism is already too high. And that's only because they do probation and that kind of stuff. So we're going to get to that too. Because like I said, the perception is what's causing the outcry. Now, in this First Step Act situation, right, they were trying to create rehabilitative programs within the jail system to help people better transition to being outside of the jail system, to try to lower the recidivism rate, right? But the truth of the matter is, most of those programs are only available at the federal level, and a lot of people aren't in federal prison. Now, there's people there, but they never made adjustments and changes at the state level because those were state-run facilities, and not even state-run facilities. They were also private-run facilities that are located within the state. So they can't make any federal changes to that because it's not their jurisdiction, so to speak. So what they end up doing is they leave it up to the states, and that's why some states have worse prisons than other states. There's no federal guidelines for the state-run facilities. It changes from state to state. So you hear about certain facilities, you hear people be like, oh, you don't want to be locked up there. And the reason why is because there's a culture in a lot of these facilities of people being mistreated, and there's not any visibility into it. So I personally have an issue with that. I'm not going to tell you much about, my own personal situation with the justice system, but I can say that the conditions within a jail are intended to stop people from coming back. It's not really supposed to be comfortable, but then there's a line where you get to, what's the difference between uncomfortable and abuse? And I guess it comes down to who's doing what and where. Now, I'm going to play this other clip for you. It's a little funny. There's this gentleman who came out of a particular jail, and he's claiming systemic racism, but I'll let y'all hear it. This is kind of a break from what I was talking about because I just thought it was a funny story. But this dude appeared on Joe Rogan, someone named Johnson, and he went to jail for some weird stuff. So I'll let y'all hear it.
I need my money. It's just me being honest. It's just me being straight. I gave you something, and we had an understanding that you were going to pay me. And when I came home, when I finally located this particular individual, he had his girlfriend with him. And this guy owed me $5,000 for some drugs that I gave him on consignment. I gave him an eighth of a kilo, which is 125 grams of cocaine. And And when I saw him, he had a bunch of jewelry on. He was with his girlfriend. She had a bunch of jewelry on. And I said, hey, man, where's my money at? Oh, yo, I was going to pay you. As far as I was concerned, his jewelry we was even. So I robbed him. And I took his jewelry.
Oh, okay.
And his girlfriend happened to be there, and
Did you take her jewelry?
unfortunately, she got caught up in the situation. I had a bunch of young guys with me, and they robbed her as well. And he got hit in the head with the gun right here on the side of his head, and he got 2 stitches. And they gave me 25 years for that case.
Did you hit him in the head?
No. One of the guys that I was with hit him in the head.
You know, one of the things that's happened through all of our conversations that we've had on the show is it highlights how insanely broken the criminal justice system is. Broken. I mean, it's so broken, and it seems so overwhelmed, and the root.
Well, let me hold on now. All right, I'm not gonna disagree with the brokenness. All right, so this guy did 25 years for committing an armed robbery because he was armed, and he robbed someone who had taken or owed him money for some drugs. So it's kind of like he's wrong. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying the 25 years wasn't excessive, but you definitely committed a major felony in this case. So, I mean, I don't know how many of you guys in my chat are going out there popping people across the head, pistol whipping them, and arm robbing them. But if you can let me know, is 25 years too much for that? I don't think he did the whole thing. He did like part of it, maybe 15. We're going to find out in a minute. But I hear Joe Rogan going into about, a situation about how broken the system is. But let's just start with the fact that he did rob someone. Not Joe Rogan, but the guy he's talking to definitely admitted to being involved in the underworld, as they would say, and someone took drugs and then he robbed them for their jewelry. So he definitely committed a crime, and someone did get hurt in the commission of that crime by getting hit over the head with the butt of a pistol. Now, he did try to minimize it by saying 2 stitches. Like, he got 2 stitches for it, so it's less than, he didn't split the whole melon. He just put a little 2-stitch gash in it. So I'm going to let Joe Rogan finish his part because he's going to tell us about how broken the system is. But I'm just saying maybe that guy isn't the best mascot for the bad system, because he did commit a crime, and then a woman got robbed in the process too. We don't know what that was about. So, all right, I don't know. I don't have a lot of sympathy for that one, but okay, let's see.
Cause of it
Maybe it'll change.
is never addressed. I mean, this is my take on this whole "Make America Great Again" thing. You want to make America great again? Make it so there's less losers. Make it so that more people
agree
have a
with
fucking
that.
chance. The idea that everyone starts on the same line. I mean, I'm not talking about equality of outcome. That's not possible. But equality of opportunity is possible. That's a possible goal. And at least we could advance that. At least we could do something to just change the course of who knows how many people's lives. And we don't do a fucking thing about it.
Whoa. Shouts to Joe Rogan. I appreciate his podcast. I'm just saying, maybe the guy who committed the armed robbery is not the guy that you have the whole we should have a prison reform question about because of sentencing. See, sentencing and prison reform are 2 different things. Sentencing is legislative, right? Sentencing is legislative reform. Thanks for the new subscription there, Kenneth. Sentencing is like the judges and stuff like that, right? And that's legislation. That has nothing to do with prison reform per se, because prison reform has to do with what happens inside the prison with the correctional officers. Sentencing is a whole different thing. Those mandatory minimums and all that, that's a whole different bill of legislation over what's regulating the actual jail systems. So like I said, shouts to Joe Rogan, because I do like his podcast, but I just think if we're going to have that conversation about systemic racism being the effect of the system, maybe the guy that committed the, armed robbery where he broke into somebody's place with a gang of other dudes and pistol whipped somebody, that's not the person you stand up in front to say, hey, this guy was mistreated. It looks like he made out okay in jail. He came out in one piece, which is more than I could say for Robert Brooks. And he's on the damn Joe Rogan podcast. Now he's an activist for prison reform. But let me just say this. Sentencing reform and prison reform are two different things, and I think people need to stop conflating those two conversations. Because what happens in the sentencing is a judge. I know some asshole judges. I do. That love giving people dumbass time because they ain't never been in the jail themselves. So to them, it's like a fun thing to do at work, is to send somebody to jail. Oh, it's Tuesday. Let's see how many people I can give time with this. I wonder if they make bets on who can rack up the most time on a docket. Like they look at the docket like how you look at a hand of spades and be like, yeah, I'm going to get about 10 books on this one. I wonder if they do that. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do. But I think they need to stay away from having the conversation about sentencing versus prison reform and jail reform and what's actually happening inside the jail, because we're going to get into that whole thing in a minute, and then you'll understand why I'm saying they're two totally different conversations. Okay? So we'll give Joe Rogan this last minute to finish out his little thought.
I mean, we're looking at each other because we just had lunch before we came. It's like the precise conversation that we had. I told you this is a motherfucker that gets it.
Oh, I know.
It just makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me, and it's not a subject of any presidential debates. It's not a subject of anybody who's running for Congress or running for Senate. We have to fix this. This is a problem that's been going on for decades and decades, back through Jim Crow, back all the way to slavery, the same communities, and we don't do anything?
Nothing at all.
Pull that a little closer.
Redlining, everything.
Pull that mic up a little bit.
Yeah, just that's good.
That's good.
Yeah, it's good.
Change the shirt.
It's wild. It really is wild. And, and
how the hell he changed his shirt? Did y'all see that? The dude had a different shirt on. In the first part, it had like a little fist on it. This right here. Queen's Defenders. And then later in the video, I guess they made him put a vest on. Right here. What, they don't want to talk about the Queen's Defenders? I guess it was free promo, and somebody was like, oh, they didn't pay for that. Put a vest on them. Nonetheless, for this particular gentleman, it turns out that he was serving, he served a 25-year jail sentence, and he explained how unfair it was for him to go to jail for as long as he did. Now, I'm going to make sure that you guys can see the text of the story. Johnson was arrested after police found a severed head and limbless torso in his apartment. And they found the victim's head in Johnson's freezer and a limbless torso in a blue bin in the apartment. So, as I was saying initially, this was definitely not the guy. I don't know, is that a real story? Let's see what the comments say. There might be a perfectly valid reason that he had a human head in his... See, people are crazy. People are crazy. Hey, shouts to Bruce Lee in the chat. You know these judges are getting kickbacks. But that's its own conversation. That's what I'm saying. They're two different conversations, and everybody normally wants to loop them into one convo. And because it's two different conversations, the conversation is never had because you're putting it's like a single issue on this side and a single issue on this side. You got to deal with them individually. If you don't, then what you get is no conversation at all, because it's like this all or nothing kind of idea, right? So I don't know. Like I said, this guy apparently had a torso or something in his house or in his freezer, which I could say that could make you not the best. If you're upset about your time and you're free now, like you didn't spend the rest of your life behind bars, I think you made out. Sounds like you won on that one. I'm just saying, if I do that, I'm pretty sure you'll never see me in public.